Imagine boarding a flight in first class, dressed sharp, polite, and calm, yet being treated like a criminal just because of your skin color. Now imagine the flight attendant doing the unthinkable, slapping the son of a black billionaire in front of everyone. What happened next froze the plane on the tarmac and left the whole airline industry shaken. If you're someone who believes justice should never depend on the color of your skin or the size of your wallet, then stick around and subscribe, because this true power shift will leave you stunned. It started like any other first-class boarding. Experience luxury, quiet sophistication, and subtle nods of approval from other passengers. But the second Jason Wellington, a tall, calm, impeccably dressed 24-year-old black man, stepped onto Flight 981 bound for London, he could already feel it: the unease, the silent stares, and then the suspicious looks from the cabin crew, especially one flight attendant, Miranda, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled hair and a plastic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jason had booked this flight last minute on his father's private platinum airline account, the kind of status that came with priority everything. But none of that seemed to matter the moment Miranda locked eyes with him. "Coach is that way," she said, gesturing dismissively without even looking at his ticket. Jason calmly replied, "First class, 3A, but instead of apologizing, she looked him up and down and said, "Are you sure you're on the right flight?" Things escalated rapidly when Miranda tried to snatch his boarding pass out of his hand to verify it, causing the nearby passengers to glance up. Jason didn't flinch. He handed it over coolly, and she scanned it, her face twitching slightly. When the system confirmed he belonged there. But instead of walking away, she whispered, "Don't make trouble on this flight. We have enough delays." Jason, unfazed, took his seat quietly. But Miranda didn't leave him alone. She kept circling, throwing subtle jabs, offering champagne to everyone, but skipping his seat, rolling her eyes when he requested a glass of water, and whispering to another flight attendant as they both stared at him. He texted his father, Harold Wellington, the billionaire energy mogul who built his empire from scratch, and explained what was happening. Harold only replied, "Don't react. I'm handling it." But Jason didn't know that handling. It meant everything was about to change, and mere things reached a boiling point when Miranda returned during pre-takeoff checks and accused Jason of tampering with the overhead bin. Jason calmly stated it wasn't his, but she demanded he stand up. When he refused rightfully, she reached down to grab his arm. Jason instinctively pulled away, and in front of every stunned first-class passenger, Miranda slapped him. It wasn't hard enough to injure, but it was loud enough to silence the cabin. Time seemed to pause. No one moved. The captain's voice rang over the intercom, announcing a delay. Jason didn't speak, but someone else did, a woman in seat 3B, a corporate attorney named Elizabeth Clarkson. "That's assault," she said aloud. "You just committed assault in front of at least 9 witnesses." Miranda, suddenly pale, stammered he was being aggressive. But no one was buying it. Just then, the plane jerked. The engines powered down. The crew began to murmur. Jason's phone pinged again. Another message from his father. "Don't move. Watch the show." 5 black SUVs had just pulled onto the tarmac, unheard of. Within seconds, uniformed men and women in sleek aviation badges boarded the flight, led by a tall black woman in a navy suit. Everyone remained seated. "We're conducting an emergency personnel investigation." The woman looked directly at Miranda and said, "Flight attendant Miranda Clark, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Come with us." Miranda tried to protest, tried to say it was a misunderstanding, but they had body cam footage, cabin surveillance, and 12 first-class passengers ready to testify. As she was escorted off, she yelled at Jason, "What are you, some kind of prince?" Jason only replied, "Something like that." Took us back in time a few hours before the flight, where Harold Wellington had already received a tip-off from his corporate security division. His son was being profiled at the gate by airline staff. Harold had previously acquired a controlling stake in the airline 2 months earlier as part of a diversification plan, and while he kept it low profile, it gave him executive override power. He'd been tracking discrimination incidents in the aviation industry for years, after watching his own wife go through something similar, and he'd had enough. So he planned the perfect storm. The moment he saw the message from Jason about the slap, he gave the order: ground the flight, fire the staff, and bring in federal aviation observers. In the present, chaos erupted across media channels as passengers tweeted what they'd witnessed. A black man in first class gets slapped by a white flight attendant for sitting where he paid to sit. The airline's social accounts were in flames. Meanwhile, back at the terminal, news helicopters hovered above the scene. Miranda, now detained in a private room, still didn't know who Jason really was until the airline's CEO walked in, flanked by Harold Wellington himself. "You struck my son," Harold said, "on an airline I partially own, in front of witnesses. That's more than just your job. That's a national scandal." The CEO was shaking. "We're issuing a public apology, firing the crew. You'll never fly commercial again." Harold looked her dead in the eye and said, "And I hope someday you learn what respect really looks like." Jason didn't even bother speaking to her. He just walked past, calm and silent, the same way he'd boarded the plane, dignified. The fallout was legendary. The airline issued a multi-page press release, but it wasn't enough. Protests erupted across major airports, calling for racial bias training. The story made CNN, BBC, and morning talk shows. Oprah invited Jason and Harold to speak about it. On air, Jason, eloquent and composed, said, "This wasn't about me. This was about what happens when power ignores prejudice. But today, we flipped the script." Meanwhile, the woman who'd stood up for him, Elizabeth Clarkson, was offered a spot as legal counsel for Wellington Enterprises with a 6-figure signing bonus. Miranda's name trended for weeks, but not in the way she'd hoped. Lawsuits were filed, her license was revoked, and her story became a case study in multiple airline HR departments. As for Jason, he never bragged, never gloated, but months later, when a young black boy recognized him at an airport and said, "You're the guy who didn't let them treat you like you were less," Jason smiled and replied, "Always know your worth." The boy beamed. And Harold, standing behind him, added, "And never let them forget it." The airline's stock plummeted before rebounding under a new name, with Harold stepping in as interim CEO to oversee reforms. Jason quietly became a board member, ensuring policy changes, equity training, and safety for all passengers, regardless of color or class. The tarmac that once froze in silence had become the ground zero for transformation. And the slap that meant to humiliate ended up becoming the thunder that shook an entire system awake. Moral: never judge someone by how they look, or you might just slap the wrong son of a billionaire. And if you believe stories like this matter, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because the next one might just change the world again.